So I had to read stories about other people healing, even if they didn't have exactly what I had. And then I had to say, well, if it worked for them, then maybe it'll work for me. But I didn't say, oh, it's going to work, because again, I just couldn't get it to sink in yet. So I said, let me just start to act as if the person who is here today were healthy. What would you do? And then another thing that was really beneficial for me is that every time I would start to feel myself relapse or in a bad place, I would say, this is only temporary. You're going to be able to overcome this. This is just one step closer to healing. It's one more way that didn't work. And that's how the mindset I took. I said, there can only be so many ways. I'm going to figure this out. And so what I always recommend for people in your community or my community is that if someone else was able to overcome what you have, you can too.
Dr. Cabral, what's the biggest change that the average person can make in their diet and or lifestyle that will help with the reduction of their inflammation?
Biggest thing I could say right off the bat is that you have to give your body time to be able to clean house. So we kind of think about that as like when we have chores to do, well, we have to actually make the time. We need to schedule it. And the best way to do that is through intermittent fasting. So we've heard a lot about intermittent fasting probably over the last couple of years. Well, it's always been around. So one of my things is I love to blend ancient wisdom, so Ayurvedic medicine at 6,000 plus years old, with state-of-the-art functional medicine. So that's based on my practices, integrative health. So functional medicine is just been talking about, let's say, intermittent fasting for the last 5 years, maybe 10, but it's been around for 2,000, 3,000, 6,000 years. But what's not spoken about the most is that you actually want to do it rhythmically with the body. So ideally, you are fasting during the dark hours of the day and you're eating during the lighter hours. And when you look at it that way, it kind of makes more sense because as humans, we're up, we're awake. We're not meant to be nocturnal animals. We would never survive in the wild if we were nocturnal. And the healthiest you can be really is working with these rhythms. So best way to reduce inflammation is to actually stop eating 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours before bed. And we can talk about this in terms of deep sleep and REM sleep tracking. And then begin eating a couple hours after waking. If we can do that, it ends up being 12, 14, 16 hours for most people. But that truly is the way so that your body can go in through a process of autophagy, scavenge these free radicals, scavenge the things that's actually creating inflammation in the first place to be able to drop those inflammatory levels. Now, there are all sorts of shortcuts and cheats which we can talk about, but the body knows how to heal. And if you give it the time and the space, it will begin that healing process.
Yeah, that's great. So what you're saying is we should eat during the day and fast at night. And I think that kind of goes a little counterintuitive to what most people think about when they're going to go into intermittent fasting. It's like, we're going to wake up, we're going to fast for 8, 10, 12 hours, and then we're going to back end our food. So are there any other benefits to front loading your food consumption in addition to working with the circadian rhythm or working with the natural light?
Well, one of the biggest things is, so it's almost been a badge of honor to skip breakfast to go at least until noon. But over the recent years, they've found that actually increases all-cause mortality, especially cardiovascular mortality. And it's because we believe, again, theorize, they know that it increases all-cause mortality, but it seems to be a greater stress in the body. So if you think about it, we wake up and our highest point of cortisol during the day is between 6 and 8 a.m., within the first typical hour or 2 hours after rising. So if we have high levels of cortisol, and we're putting greater stress in the body without feeling it. So if we're dropping into low blood sugar, hypoglycemia, your body will actually produce something called cortisol. And cortisol is simply a stress hormone that tells your body to break down stored glycogen. So glucagon will break down glycogen, and it brings then sugar into the bloodstream for fight or flight based response. Now, it's not really a big deal if you have a super relaxed morning, you're meditating, you're doing like let's say a hatha yoga class. But if you're someone that's getting up, you're doing a hard workout, you're doing a cold plunge, you're starting your day in like rush hour traffic, your body, no matter what, needs fuel. And so it's going to break that fuel down somewhere from stored glycogen in the liver. And if that's gone from the muscle tissue, there's a lot of different processes. Well, no matter what, it's stress on the body. So that's one way to look at it. But the second is this. Think about eating your last meal of the day at 8 o'clock at night. Let's say you go to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Okay, you've had this huge meal. Maybe you're doing 1 meal a day. Maybe you're just doing 2 meals a day, whatever it might be. You're taking in 1,000 calories, maybe even more, of hard to digest foods. Maybe it's a steak, maybe it's a good amount of protein, whatever it might be. Your blood sugar level and your digestion is most likely going to be elevated throughout the night. Now, we've tracked this in our practice. We see hundreds of thousands of people a year. And we use continuous glucose monitors and other processes. People can do this right at home. One of my big things is teaching people basically to how to be their own doctor, their own health practitioner. And because, I work with someone maybe once a week or maybe once a month, and there's 168 hours in a week, right? So you're with yourself 168 of those hours. You need to know these processes. But I'm telling you right now, your blood sugar with a big meal will still stay elevated, not just 2, 3 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, especially if it's a steak with some fat, with some carbs. You'll see multiple spikes throughout the night. Now, that means you're not bringing down your glucose levels while you're sleeping, your blood sugar levels, which means now you're not tapping into body fat as adequately. Because when your body's at rest, it is actually burning the greatest percentage of fat, not the most amount, but the greatest percentage at more of like, let's say, a zone one, if you talk about kind of that exercise wise. So much lower cardiovascular taps into more percentage, not necessarily total. So between blood sugar alone and the stress in the body upon waking, what we want people to do is not necessarily, you don't have to eat immediately upon waking, but once you start the stressful part of your day, it's not detrimental. It's actually beneficial to start eating food and begin that fast more hours before midnight or more hours before you hit the hay, go to bed.
Yeah. Now, are there certain types of foods? And I love what you're sharing here because I think it's reconfirming something we were all taught when we were younger. Is like sounds like breakfast is in fact going to be one of the more important meals of the day. But in terms of like what we should be consuming, I know that this has been the case for me. I started fasting pretty regularly back in 2018. I think one thing I notice or at least experience out of it is during those fasted periods, especially in the morning, is heightened focus. Like really be able to lock in. I know, in the online coaching space or, even in kind of the biohacking space, it's like a lot of people will use this to increase their productivity of maybe what's called deep work, right? And I know sometimes certain foods will cause not brain fog, but it's like you kind of begin to experience more fatigue as you consume certain types of foods. So if we're going to be eating earlier in the day, what foods can we or what foods should we eat to avoid or allow us to still stay into that deep focus, heightened deep work flow state?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it is looking at it, what were we using instead of food? Meaning, are you able to wake up, fasted, and work? Or many people, they wake up and use a nootropic, or they wake up and use caffeine, or they wake up and do something to stimulate the body. So once we stimulate the body, we're stimulating norepinephrine. That's the first stress trigger. It's a stress neurotransmitter. We sometimes call it a stress hormone. We stimulate that, which is essentially adrenaline. We stimulate dopamine, and we stimulate then cortisol from the caffeine. So that's how most people like they're getting that focus. Like no doubt about it, caffeine works. Certain like dopamine precursors work. There's no doubt about that. But what I would say is this: do you have the same focus and energy if you're not using those? Because if you're not, you're just substituting one fuel source for another. We prefer people to use a healthy fuel source such as food. Now it comes down to, is your digestion strong enough in the morning to not use that energy to move towards digestion instead of focus? So we do something called liquid before lunch. So I work with a lot of executives, I work with a lot of high performers, athletes, etc. We do a very simple smoothie, typically a couple hours after waking. People can do greens powders, they can do whatever they want. But the smoothie is going to be protein, it's going to be slow digesting carbs or your berries, so high fiber, lower glycemic. And we're going to drink that. So typically, I have my people in my practice make about a liter. So that's 4 glasses of water. So it's or 4 glasses of fluid in that smoothie. And they're going to sip that while they're doing their work. So it's easy to digest, which means it's not taking a whole lot of energy from your gastric juices, from your stomach, to be able to get that fuel. And then it's time release. It's like an IV drip of nutrition into your body. Then lunch is going to be the bigger meal. And then dinner is going to be slightly smaller, easier to digest. Now, that's ideal world. I will let you know that I work through the day. So my lunch has to be fairly easy to digest as well. I'm not going to sit down to a steak or a whole chicken or whatever it might be, because now the blood flow is in my stomach, and that's not going to be helpful. So I can give you some tricks for digestion, digestive enzymes. You can use, I'll do sometimes a decaf black coffee afterwards, which is a great digestive aid without the stimulation there if you don't need it. Hot ginger tea is a great one. A little apple cider vinegar and room temp water or hot water. Lemon in that can be really nice. But like most people, my bigger meal, my protein meal, is still at night. I just try to have it before 6 p.m. and then I can get to bed. I try to get to bed by 10 p.m. And the reason is I'm up at 5:36 because even though I like to be a night owl, I know that the real benefits with the anti-aging come with getting to bed earlier. And I also like the quiet time before my two daughters wake up in the morning. I get to do my work, that for me, my me time work.
Yeah. And is that the ideal kind of window there? We've always been told, right? Don't eat an hour, don't eat 90 minutes before you go to bed. But is ideally you want about 4 hours before you kind of hit the bed to allow the digestion to kind of take place?
Yes, and it also depends on the meal that you're eating. Let's say you did soup before bed. Like if we go back in the day, it was fruit or easy, like the things you gathered, right? And then you would have maybe you catch food, whatever it might be, 1 o'clock or so, 2 o'clock. You'd eat something heavier, and then you might have soup, before bed or like a meager meal. That's going to digest quickly, if we think about that, right? So it's also like when we're thinking about how long is this meal going to take to digest? So I'm going to give you the breakdown. Fruit digests in your stomach in about 30 minutes. Starch, about 60 minutes. Your proteins and your raw veggies, like a salad, probably 3 hours. Could be two. For something like eggs, might be even quicker. But if you think about, okay, just think about chewing fish. Easy, right? Easy to chew, break down fish. Think about chewing a steak. It takes some time, right? To chew up that steak and swallow it and digest it. It just takes more time, the thermogenic effect, than to break that down. So, big steak before bed, more hours needed. Now, I can tell you this, it's 3 to 4 hours for most people with just a normal sized dinner. So, yes, that's the window. But you'll actually be able to look at this if you like to track your sleep, which I recommend everybody do. Whoop strap, Apple Watch, Aura Ring, Fitbit, whatever works for you. I'm pretty agnostic in terms of your tracking. I do like the Aura Ring because it's not on your wrist, but whatever works for you. Just do what you're doing now and look at your average over a week. I'm guaranteeing you, if you stop eating 3 to 4 hours before bed, same food, same everything else is equal, your deep sleep will improve, your resting heart rate will come down, and most importantly, your heart rate variability will increase. That means your body's resilience against stress will improve. Like, no doubt about it, you'll see better recovery.
Yeah, no, that's great. Any reason why you mentioned the Oura Ring? Because you added a kind of asterisk caveat there, is like it's not on your wrist. So what about the device on your wrist, or is that just a preference? Get back to the show in a second, guys, but real quick, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizers. Do you know if you're getting enough magnesium? Because 4 out of 5 Americans aren't. And that's a big problem because magnesium is involved in more than 300 biochemical reactions in your body. Today, I want to talk to you about the most common signs to look for that could indicate you're magnesium deficient. Listen carefully to the end because there's going to be a special offer happening at the end of this that could be exactly what you need. Are you irritable or anxious? Do you struggle with insomnia? Do you experience muscle cramps or twitches? Do you have high blood pressure? Are you sometimes constipated? There are dozens of symptoms of magnesium deficiency, but these are just a few of the most common ones. Now, here's what most people don't know. Taking just any magnesium supplement won't solve your problem because most supplements use the cheapest kinds that your body can't use or absorb. That's why I exclusively recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizer. It's the only full spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually use and absorb. All Biooptimizer supplements are the best in class, guys. I've been working with and using their products for over 7 years now. For some reason you feel differently, you can get a full refund, no questions asked. They're so confident in this that they're going to offer a 365-day money back guarantee. Just go to biooptimizers.com/FrankRich. And in addition, we're going to give you a discount if you use code RICH10 for 10% off. Once again, guys, visit biooptimizers.com/FrankRich or click the link down there in the show notes and use code RICH10 to receive 10% off your order today.
It's more a preference, rolling over. Like I actually just switched from the Garmin back to the Apple Watch because I wanted simplicity. Even though I love to track and I track everything, I also like simplicity. And for me, I don't like wearing a watch to bed. That's just me. Wearing a ring is super easy, that I can wear. But truthfully, whatever works for you is what you should use. Whatever you're going to use consistently is what matters most.
Yeah, it's like what's the best diet? The one that you can stick with the longest, right? What's the best training plan? The ones you're going to be able to consistently do over time. Well, what's the best tracker? The one that you're actually going to utilize the benefits of it. I love that. You talked about delaying caffeine. We've had a lot of talks around morning routines. It's something I've really, I don't want to say I've mastered in my life, but I'm always looking at, okay, what can I tweak? What can I optimize? Obviously, there's been a lot of research that's come out recently, delaying caffeine 90 minutes, getting that early morning sun exposure, obviously leads to, the melatonin release later on at night. It kind of taps into the adrenaline release later on in the day. So, we talk a lot about get up, hydrate yourself, 32 ounces of water, get outside, try to get some natural sunlight if possible, get some movement going. If you can, get some cold water exposure early on as well. After all that, you're 90 minutes into it, then we look at caffeine. But if we're going to have a meal before that, at what point can we have the caffeine? Because we also want to know we shut it off early as well, like no caffeine afternoon. So are you pro caffeine, anti caffeine? How do you kind of use it with this fasting where we're eating early on in the day?
Well, I'll tell you this, that so first of all, everybody can figure out what the right methodology is for them through at-home lab testing. I know we'll talk about that in the future, but that's the wave of the future. Meaning like you and I are painting scenarios, but we're also just making educated guesses for people based on how you feel. So let me give you a couple examples. If you produce a lot of cortisol early in the morning naturally, the last thing that you need is, and again, so I'm not saying this isn't great. You don't need cold and you don't need caffeine. Cold increases adrenaline, norepinephrine, and dopamine. It is amazing for people who wake up in a low mood, groggy, depressed. They naturally lean that way. But for people like me that are amped when they wake up, like I'm ready. I'm ready for the day right away. Now, it wasn't always that way. I was the exact opposite. I literally had Addison's disease, which is the inability to produce cortisol. So I know how that feels to be a walking zombie. Literally don't wake up until noon. Just never shut off the melatonin and start turning on cortisol. But if I go into a cold plunge or do a fasted workout a little while after waking, I'm exhausting my nervous system. Now, for other people, they're stimulating their nervous system. That's a good thing. And I have many people in my practice like that. So now what about caffeine and what about, that part of it? Still beneficial. Most people get the most benefit from caffeine though, after they're out of their 6 to 8 a.m. window. So, because that's already your highest cortisol production. So what you do is you want a meal and then you take in your caffeine or coffee or black tea or whatever you like. And the reason is that the caffeine effect is then blunted. So it almost gets released like tea, like a green tea, because you're using the caffeine to help with digestion, energy for digestion, and then time released after that. But if you put coffee on an empty stomach, over time, you're straining your nervous system. Now, again, if you're a larger body type, an endomorph body type, or the kapha body type from Ayurveda, and you run a little bit more depressed and you run a little bit lower mood and you run your at-home labs and it's low cortisol, well, the caffeine just brings you to baseline. But for people that are revved, you actually want to do like half decaf or all decaf if you enjoy coffee. And so that's what I do. I've kind of learned my body. I do half decaf. I love coffee, very much enjoy it. So I get all my favorite coffees. Like I was just in Costa Rica, get some Costa Rican coffee beans, do a nice pour over, make a little ritual out of it. But it's after my breakfast. So it's blunted. If that way.
I mean, you're big on wisdom here, and I know we'll kind of get into your book, The 6,000-Year-Old Secret. As you're sharing this, it's like the coffee after breakfast. It makes me go back to like a child and like spending the summer with my grandparents. Like my grandpa never drank coffee except for after the breakfast meal. Like, and I don't think he knew any of the science behind it. It's just like, sometimes it's like these older generations, like they knew the things that worked because they just worked. It's like he wasn't a coffee drinker except after we had breakfast. He'd have one small cup. It's amazing.
Well, that's what it's there. So it's there as a digestive. It's a bitter essentially, and it's really great at that, and it provides energy. So I'm saying coffee is a supplement, and it's one of the most potent and powerful and amazing supplements in the world. People who drink coffee get more antioxidants. So it's funny, but in a Western-based diet, the majority of antioxidants come from coffee in people's diet. So I'm not saying to take that away from anybody. It is actually the almost the number one thing. So green coffee bean is actually an extract is number one, but coffee is one of the top things to produce something called brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. And that's one of the main things to help with, it's not the only thing, prevention of Alzheimer's and dementia. And so when we look at these things, okay, well, what does it do? It's essentially a powerful antioxidant that helps the brain to scavenge free radicals and to work a little bit on plaque as well that begins to develop. So I'm a big advocate of coffee. It could be decaf, just Swiss water processed because you don't want all the essentially ethanol or gasoline they use to decaffeinate it. But get the antioxidants, get the benefit, blunt the caffeine spike, the stress spike on your nervous system by just having it after a meal.
Yeah. Now you mentioned people that are, I think you said they were high cortisol people or high cortisol producers should avoid some of these things like the cold exposure and whatnot early on in the morning. How can somebody know if they are a high cortisol producing individual?
So there's one lab. It's called the stress mood and metabolism test. It looks at estrogen and progesterone. It looks at testosterone and DHEA, and then it looks at cortisol 4 times throughout the day. Why this is important? Because anybody can run their blood work. I'm sure you've run yours, and you might get cortisol tested by a good lab. Amazing, but it's always between 8 and 10 in the morning. So you always want your blood work done between 8 and 10 in the morning. But they don't look at your cortisol throughout the whole day. So they'll look at your cortisol a couple hours after waking. That's not really what you want. You want your AM cortisol upon waking. Then you want it before noon. Then you want it at dinner time. And then you want it before bed. So not everybody's going to watch this on video, but there's something called a diurnal rhythm. We humans are diurnal. So we have an uptime and we have a downtime. And so we have, let me just give you the ranges here. So between 6 and 8 on a salivary, so saliva-based cortisol test, it's the most accurate way to test cortisol. You are looking at somewhere around between a 6 and a 9. Just think of units, 6 and 9 units produced between 6 and 8 in the morning. So whatever your wake time is. Ideally, you want it right around an 8. Okay, by the time you get to lunch, it's a 2. By the time you get to dinner, it's a 1. By the time it's before bed, it's a 0.5. So when you look at it, it's outlandishly weighted to the beginning of the day. What does that do? It shuts off melatonin, which is your sleep hormone. Well, like me, when I had Addison's disease, if you don't produce cortisol in the morning, you don't really stop. You don't know when it's day or night. You're awake, but are you really awake? No. So one thing that I found, especially when I was dealing with Addison's disease from about 17 years old to 27 years old, is that if you cannot turn cortisol on in the morning, your body doesn't know essentially day from night. So we're meant to produce this large amount of cortisol upon waking. And what it does, it shuts down our sleep hormone, melatonin. So now we wake up with energy. Cortisol is literally an energy-based hormone. And so our pituitary gland says, produce norepinephrine, produce cortisol. We start to wake our body up. And then, believe it or not, it says, okay, now it's time to turn on hunger. So if you have a strong metabolism, you have a strong thyroid, within an hour, 2 hours of waking, you actually start to get that hunger. And that's the time as well that's saying, okay, the body needs fuel. Now it's your choice, because we do fasting in our practice as well, but it's just not daily long fast. It might be once a week, might be a longer fast. And then every quarter, we do a longer functional medicine detox, basically, that gets in that 3 days of autophagy, but just not every day, because we need to think about how often we want to stress the body. It'd be like doing high intensity interval training 7 days a week. High intensity interval training is great. Do you want to do that every day? Probably not, right? Or how long can you sustain that for life? So we look at cortisol as something that's bio-individual, that we can look at the individual, say, are they producing proper cortisol in the morning and proper cortisol in the evening? And you find that with that stress mood metabolism test, because men who have low testosterone or men that have higher conversion to, let's say, estrogen, often have a lot of stress in the body. And that's why they're producing less testosterone, because hormones basically being shunted towards stress hormone, which is cortisol. And they're not producing enough cortisol in the morning to really wake the body up, but they're producing too much at night. So that's called tired and wired. So basically, they could fall asleep all day, or they don't have the ambition, drive, libido that they want. But at night, it's hard for them to fall asleep. It's hard for them to turn off the mind. So our job with those individuals is to lower cortisol in the evening, to then begin to repair and improve the overall sex hormones like testosterone, and then have naturally rising cortisol in the morning. So that's essentially how we look at the process naturally to rebalance the body.
Now, for these individuals, I want to kind of drive that point home here, talking about the low T and the stress and the cortisol. Is the cortisol and the stress a byproduct of low T, or does a stressful life, so if somebody has a lot of stress going on, does that work the counter way as well? Like, can your stress and cortisol impact your testosterone negatively?
That's the number one. So in our practice, we've run now about 500,000 labs. We've seen over 250,000 people in our practice one-on-one. The number one thing that drives estrogen dominance in women, so basically low progesterone for fertility, and the number one thing that drives low testosterone in men is stress, without a doubt. Like, not even close. And by the time they come to us, we already see because we only look at free testosterone, so it's the same saliva test. And what we can see is the lower cortisol typically in the morning and the higher towards the night. Now, if we're fortunate and the guy's a little bit more self-aware And he's like, oh, something's not quite right. And they get this early, they can actually see high cortisol across the board. Now, if they're looking at total cortisol production for the day above a 13, basically if you add up all four numbers, then you'll say, oh, this is why my testosterone's low. It's because I'm producing this stress hormone all day long. So then what we do is we work on what we call the de-stress protocol: diet, exercise, stress reduction, tox removal, rest, emotional balance, scientifically backed supplements, and a success mindset. So it's never one thing. There's no one silver bullet. I could give you the best herbs and vitamins and minerals to boost testosterone, but if you're not improving your deep sleep and your REM sleep, if you're not doing the right things with your nutrition, eventually we're just propping you up with just one part of it. I like guys to be 80% good in all 8 areas. Then you don't have to be perfect in any one area.
Yeah. What were those 8 areas again?
It's called the de-stress protocol. And I mentioned that in my book as well. That's the second half of it. It's diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, because most guys don't know that heavy metals can actually lead to inflammation, which can lead to testosterone issues. So it's diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal. Then it's rest. So basically your sleep protocols. And then I think you actually mentioned earlier, non-sleep deep rest. And then there is your emotional balance, extremely important. A lot of guys don't like to talk about it, but inner child-based work or childhood trauma, really important to look at that. And then we've got scientifically backed supplements. So the zinc, the vitamin C, the tribulus, the maca, the things that we know work. And then we have the success mindset. So success, I'm big on mindset. And the reason is that honestly, we know how to help everybody heal. We really do. And that's not from an ego perspective, but it's basically saying that if you're dealing with high blood pressure or low testosterone or migraines or psoriasis or autoimmune, or like I was, Addison's and all sorts of issues, I had type 2 diabetes, I had all sorts of issues, is that there's always an underlying root cause. And the nice thing is, there's only like 12 reasons for each different disease of the body. So I'm not saying that we're perfect, but we're going to find it. There's only 12. It's just going to take a little bit of time. We'll find out what it is and rebalance it. But the success mindset is that the only people that we've seen really relapse and go back are those that quit, that give up on it. And that's unfortunate. And it happened to me many times. It's because I didn't get my answers right away. I relapsed multiple times when I was in my 20s. And I needed that mindset to get me back on track each time.
Yeah, no, Stephen, that's great, man. And I love that you're talking about this mindset. And it's such a big part of the work that you do. And I even love the language that you're using here. You said relapse. Like, I don't think that's something that people would ever think about in terms of their health or fitness. And obviously, I work in the addiction space. And I've said this for the last 5+ years now, is when it comes to an addiction, more specifically with the guys that we work with that are struggling with pornography, it's like this has been a part of their life for so many years, oftentimes decades. And what I've seen hold so many men back is the limiting belief that they can actually create a life without it. So in terms of like the success mindset, is it like if you've been unhealthy or you've been disease oriented for such a long time, is a part of the mindset actually envisioning who you can be living fully healthy and optimal?
Yeah. And so think about it like this. So I had autoimmune diseases, I had type 2 diabetes, I had Addison's disease, and a host of other issues through essentially a prime of my life, right? 17 years old through 27. So my senior year of high school, through college, through my early 20s, had debilitating inflammatory and certain diseases. And after a while, especially with many medical doctors telling me that it's either all in my head or that we're just going to have to manage this with pharmaceutical drugs, you start to internalize that and you become essentially a victim of this state that you're in. And so what many of us have to do, and again, I'm sick for 10 years. How would I be healthier when I'm an older adult than I would as a kid? Never. Like, that's not normal. So what you need to do is suspend disbelief, right? That's it. I always tell people, like, I wanted to believe. It's not that I didn't, but I didn't see any future possibility of me being healthy. I was never that healthy. So what I had to do initially is just not lie to myself. I had to say this because I'm a big believer in the law of attraction. I'm a big believer in visualization, but I had to be realistic because my subconscious wouldn't believe it. So I had to read stories about other people healing, even if they didn't have exactly what I had. And then I had to say, well, if it worked for them, then maybe it'll work for me. But I didn't say, oh, it's going to work, because again, I just couldn't get it to sink in yet. So I said, let me just start to act as if. Let me start to act as if the person who is here today were healthy. What would you do? And then another thing that was really beneficial for me is that every time I would start to feel myself relapse or in a bad place, I would say, this is only temporary. You're going to be able to overcome this. This is just one step closer to healing. It's one more way that didn't work. And that's how the mindset I took. I said, there can only be so many ways. I'm going to figure this out. And so, what I always recommend for people in your community or my community is that if someone else was able to overcome what you have, you can too. If no one's ever been able to do it, that's a challenge. You can be the first, but it's more challenging. But if there's a blueprint, trust me, if you follow the blueprint and just tweak it just a little bit for you, not change the whole thing. People always like, well, I'm going to do it my way. No, do it the way that's been proven to work over and over and over, and make subtle changes for what might need to be advised for you. So I could give you a whole food list of 100 foods that are great for you, and then you are sensitive to 2 or 3 of them. Okay, don't throw out the whole plan. Just don't eat the 2 to 3 foods that you don't do well with. And so that's always the mindset that I took, is that Kaizen mindset is like, I just need to be 1% better. Like, let me just get 1%, 1%, 1%. And then what happens is you accumulate small wins. And so I would go 3 months without relapsing. And then I would go 4. And then I would go to 5. And I'm like, oh, this is going really well. And then I would go 6 months. And when I went 6 months, I would say, even if it happens again, it's okay. I am well. It's just one little setback. Everybody has setbacks. It's not like adults never get sick. I can get sick too. I'm okay. And so that's how I looked at it.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love reading the stories of other people, and if one person has done it, then I can do it as well. Like, and he even said, act as if you already that person. That's fake it till you make it, right? But I think a lot of people, they hear that, it's like, fake it till you make it. That means I got to pretend, I got to rent a Lamborghini if I want to be a millionaire. It's like, no, fake, you are the person. So begin to do the things that that person does. A healthy individual, begin to live the life as somebody, which means you're going to track your sleep. You're going to track your calories. You're going to train. Begin to act as the person that is no longer addicted to a substance or to an outlet or to a vice. Stop doing those things. Have a state of gratitude. Have a regular meditative practice. I love that so well. I want to circle all the way back, and I apologize, I'm taking us back to the intermittent fasting conversation, but you said something right out of the jump in terms of cyclical intermittent fasting. And I think people, when they hear cyclical, that means it's something that we do on a cyclical basis, right? So are we not following the same fasting practice every day? And if so, what does a cyclical intermittent fasting look like?
How I look at it is this, is that our body is truly a diurnal machine and being. Like, our testosterone's highest in the morning, our cortisol's highest in the morning, our output essentially is highest the first half of the day. And however you want to look at that, hunter, gatherer, work, etc., that's how we want our bodies to be. Now, we live in a modern-based lifestyle that provides light. We've heard about all the negatives of blue light. Well, it's always been negative. We roll with the tide for the media and whatever is kind of most popular. And typically we always over exaggerate in the short term and give credence to in the long term. Like, it still matters. And so what I want to say is this, is that we need to start living as part of the world, nature, and not independent of it. So I always like to say to people this way. Let's say if you've ever been camping before, if not, that's okay. We can kind of just play along. If you were to grab your tent, grab your gear, go out into the woods, let's say you didn't need to hunt, but let's say you foraged or whatever you want to think about it. Within 2 weeks, trust me, you'd be going to bed a couple hours after dark and you'd be waking up around sunrise. And the reason is that sun is a very powerful alarm clock. And if you've been doing that with no sleep, say you go to bed at midnight usually, or 1 a.m., and you're waking up at 5 or 6 a.m. on 5-6 hours sleep, and you're now walking around in nature, hiking, you're foraging for food, hunting for food, whatever it is, you're going to be exhausted by 5-6 o'clock at night. You will reset that circadian rhythm. And most likely, unless you're a savage, which is okay, you're going to want some food to start your day with all that exercise and output that you're outputting. So when we start to think of it that way in nature, this would be normal. Now, you probably wouldn't have access to all sorts of meat and things like that first thing in the morning. You'd have simple foods, and that just kind of gets you going to then hunt for your bigger meal. And so what I like to let people know is fasting 12 hours is your intermittent fast. That's what we consider an intermittent fast. So 6 at night or 7 at night to 6, 7 in the morning, that's your minimum intermittent fast. Then after that, you can go to 13 hours, 14 hours, 15, 16. For most people, we never go past 16. And people who want to do 16, this is how we do it in our practice. Let's say it's stopping eating at 6 p.m. at night. That's typically the earliest people can stop. If you have kids or whatever, you might be done by 6. That's what we try to do in my family. And then you go to midnight, that's 6. And you just need to add on then 10 more, so to 10 a.m. So that would be your longest fast really overnight. You can do breakfast or your first meal a day around 10, then around 1 or 2 o'clock, your second, and then your third meal, let's say 6 o'clock or so at night, whatever you'd like to do. And that's a pretty simple formula. And the reason why we like 3 meals instead of just 1 or 2 is that you're then not overtaxing your digestive system. You're going to eat the same calories anyway, so you can just space them out. And you're fueling your body all day long. So you're not, the thing is, it's easy to get away with all this in your 20s. It's hard to get away with it in your 40s, 50s, and beyond, is not fueling your body and straining your nervous system every day. So we focus on exercise and recovery, fueling the body, not getting to exhaustion, and recovery. And so we'll do a normal intermittent fast, like my intermittent fast, 6 at night to 8 in the morning. Doesn't mean everybody else needs to do it. That's what works for my body. I wake up around 5:36. I've got a couple hours relaxed morning routine, get my daughters ready. They head to school. I'm eating my breakfast. I'm taking my walk, starting my day. And then, although 1 day a week, 3 times a month, so it's always on Monday, I have my flex meal, cheat meal, on let's say Saturday night, Sunday, normalized blood sugar, all that. On Monday, I'll go from Sunday night, dinner with my family, till Monday night, dinner with my family, or pre-workout smoothie or something like that at 4:30 p.m. And that's a 24-hour fast once a week. So now I'm getting deeper into autophagy. Not every day, once a week. And then when I go to do my workout, again, we can get as deep into the science as you want. I will recover faster and not have as much inflammation if I have a peri-workout smoothie with carbohydrates in it. So again, is that right for everybody that are looking to lose fat and all those things? Probably not. But for people that are simply looking to keep muscle in their body, enjoy their workout, not have as much inflammation, go about their work, all that works really well.
What's your go-to carb source there?
Fruit. So something easy to digest and then high in antioxidants. So I'm always looking at, how do I get in 7 to 9 servings of fruit and vegetables every day?
God, okay.
And so I just make it part of that. Now, there's obviously lots of easy, fast digesting carbs, but if I can get the polyphenols in there for the anti-aging part, that's what I want. And so it's become, I was a personal trainer at 18 years old, and my nutrition plan for clients was always based on body transformation. But now it's based on body transformation plus anti-aging. Now that I'm in my mid 40s, it's important. And the last part is this: every 12 weeks, then, this is strategic, we do a 2-day, with 7 days total, but a functional medicine detox. And 2.5 of those days is basically liquid fasting. And that's so we get into a deep level of autophagy. We kill as many cancer cells as we can. We scavenge weak mitochondria, any necrotic tissue, viruses in the body. And it's also a time of rest for the body. So we're not trying to go for personal best in our workouts for those 2 days. And that has been an absolute game changer in our practice, especially with people dealing with stubborn weight loss issues, the last 5-10 pounds, they just can't seem to get off, inflammation, poor sleep, brain fog, and namely inflammatory-based diseases like autoimmune issues.
I love the 1 24-hour fast per week. That's actually a protocol we have inside of our program as well. Now, obviously, we haven't worked with 250,000 people across the world. We've had a lot of success in 850-ish at this point. I'm a former bodybuilder, meathead, turned addiction lifestyle life coach, right? So I don't have your medical background. What is the purpose? You mentioned autophagy and I think a few other things there of that once per week 24-hour fast, because I see it as a way to gain self-control, discipline. There's a spiritual component. I think we can get closer to God or whoever, however we kind of align spiritually there. So we're fasting, praying, all that kind of stuff. And obviously it helps in our recovery work. But from a medical health, longevity, aging kind of standpoint, what are the benefits we're getting out of that 1 24-hour fast per week?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a recovering meathead myself, so I appreciate that. I'm 5'8". I used to be 200 pounds in my early 20s from just natural bodybuilding back in the day.
6'3" at my peak. I was 280 fat in the off season. The last time I competed, I was about 237 on stage in the classic physique. But I've always been the bigger frame guy.
Yes, that's that's monstrous. That's great. So no, and I love it, and I understand that part. And so, but back in the day when I was doing bodybuilding, if anybody ever told me not to eat right before bed, or have something like a steak and or like ham and eggs in the breakfast, then I would think that they're crazy. But here's why though. So 2 different goals. The goal of a bodybuilder is to be in an anabolic state as often as possible. So you take a nap, you take GABA before bed, you do all sorts of different things to get you in that deep anabolic state. You're eating, like a friend of mine, I wasn't this deep, but a friend of mine used to wake himself up and do a sweet potato and shake, around 2 a.m.
I had an
because you're
alarm clock that
always
went off
trying
at
to feed.
3 a.m. Yeah, I had an alarm clock. I had protein in the freezer mixed as like a creamy dessert. I'd wake up 3 a.m. every morning, down that thing, and then try to get back to sleep as quick as I possibly could. If I go back and talk to old Frank, like I'd be like, dude, you're not going to gain that much more muscle by doing that, and you're just tearing your sleep apart.
I know it, but you're after that one goal, and that's what it is. It's like to be in an anabolic state. So now what does fasting do? Puts you in a catabolic state. So it's very interesting. So it's everything in life is not about moderation. It's actually about balance. We call it equilibrium, dynamic equilibrium. So your body's always in this state of flux. And so when it's fed, it's more in an anabolic state. And when it's not fed, what happens is you lower mTOR and you increase something called AMPK and autophagy. Well, AMPK and autophagy is where your body can go in and actually scavenge and do the work of cleaning house. But when you're always in the anabolic state, it gives preference to that. So another way to think of it is you can be in fight or flight, or you can be in the rest and relax, the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic nervous system dominance. You can't be in both at the same time. It's one system with two different tones or vibrations, however you want to look at it. And so you can be in a growth mode or you can be in the catabolic mode. Now, the nice thing is we can balance those. Intermittent fasting would be more of the catabolic, but that's why in the beginning you can feel great. But if we've seen people go on, let's just say a vegan diet, nothing wrong with the vegan diet, and they feel great in the beginning, but they might feel worse a year later and they don't know why because they felt great for a year. Or people feel great removing carbs, but then they feel worse a year later. Why? They've just swung the pendulum from one side to the other. They might have had digestive issues, candida overgrowth, or parasites, or SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so when they were eating starchy carbs, it just fed that bacteria or yeast in their gut. And then they shrunk the whole gut microbiome by doing keto or carnivore. And then now they're not feeling as good because now they're not fueling one half of their body. Basically, the sympathetic nervous system, which uses glycogen preferentially. And so everything is just about not moderation, but balance. So what we want to do with a fast is give your body time to clean up. And here's the interesting thing they found, which again, I wish that I knew this back in the day, is when you come out of a fast, you actually now have increased protein synthesis. So your body is now more receptive to the protein you're putting in, or more specifically, the amino acids. And it will improve nitrogen retention. It will improve protein synthesis. So your body always knows best. And that's what we like to share. Give your body time to heal and do its thing. You weren't meant to eat for 16 hours of the day.
Yeah, no, amen to that. We set this whole conversation up at the beginning on what's the quickest way, 1, 2 tricks, and it's obviously was the intermittent fasting on somebody can reduce inflammation. What are signs, symptoms that people could be looking at that, hey, my inflammation is either out of control or like let's speak to who should be concerned about inflammation.
So if you have ongoing, so chronic means more than, technically it means more than 6 weeks. So if you have chronic fatigue, meaning like you've been tired more days than not, you have low mood or brain fog. So any of the lows, low mood, low energy, low ambition, low drive, low libido, any lows, it is probably a sign that your body is overreaching. Overtrained is something totally different in exercise, but we use the term overtrained and we never use the term overreaching. Overtrained is literally nervous system exhaustion. So most people don't get there, but let's say it is. So poor recovery from a workout is another one, meaning like you're just sore like all the time now, and you don't have the energy that next day. So all of these things are a sign that you are chronically inflamed and that your recovery is not meeting your output. So there's basically energy out. Think about it this way. That's your fasting, energy out. It is your workouts. It's your cold plunge. It's anything that takes energy from your body, your work, everything. And then energy in is your food. It is your sleep. It's your quiet time, your meditation, all of those things, your reading, meditation. I mentioned binaural beats, PMF mat, even sauna. That's energy in. So what we need, especially as we get older, is to balance energy in versus energy out. We get away with it in our 20s, but that's why, although again, I'm not going to throw any shade on anybody who's a 20-something-year-old personal trainer or nutritionist or whatever. It's just you haven't lived enough life yet. So use the research, use the people that have been there, done that, to not say that you don't have knowledge. You have great knowledge, but your 45, especially 65-year-old client recovers differently than the 25-year-old one. They don't have the same ability to recover from stress that a 25-year-old does.
Yeah, we just had Dr. Jim Stepani on the show, which I'm not sure how familiar you are with him. 25 years. He used to be the science editor for Muscle and Fitness. Studied at Yale University. We got into that conversation around the 20-year-old trainer with the great six-pack abs that literally is just using his gifts that he was given to monetize. Nothing wrong with that, right? But in terms of people that are looking for actually information, need to find guys like yourself with Jim that have the academics behind it, but also the real world application as well. So I love that you went there as well. We'll talk briefly about toxins because I think it's number 3 or 4 on your list here of toxin removal. How concerned do we need to be? And maybe kind of the same question I set you up at the beginning is like, what's the quickest 1-2 lever that people can pull to begin to kind of lower their toxic exposure?
When I would talk about this, let's say 2010, this is the thing like leaky gut, right? If you mentioned leaky gut in the early 2000s, people would just laugh you out of a doctor's office or, online. But now, leaky gut, also called increased intestinal permeability, is written about on Harvard's health website. So like these are things. Toxins, we're talking about in 2010, crazy talk. But now we know when I wrote my book, there were 77,000 man-made chemicals in the United States that were allowed, about 8,000 in Europe. Okay. Now there's well over 100,000 with thousands more that come out every year. So
Wait
what
a
are
minute,
these?
77, I'm sorry, real quick. 77,000 in the US, 8,000 in Europe.
So Europe does not allow the level of toxins that we allow. So pesticides, plastics, etc. So when I say toxins, it's kind of a catch-all because I can't name all 100,000. I could probably name, let's say 100 or so. That's about it. But these are all the things that are almost the impronounceable ones. But the way that we know them are, think of like our glyphosate, our herbicides, pesticides, all of those. So we know that. But then there's parabens, triclosan, that is most people's bath products, toothpaste, etc. And then there's microplastics, which are now being talked about even more. And here's why. When they looked at the blood and actually plaque in one of the most recent studies, they found not a small amount, like half a teaspoon worth to a teaspoon worth of plastics clogging up in people's arteries. Now, why is this important? The number one cause of death still is cardiovascular disease, and specifically in men. That's the number one reason people die is cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular complications. And these microplastics and potentially heavy metals like aluminum, which we know are implicated in Alzheimer's disease, not the only thing, but implicated in it. All of these things can accumulate in the body and we are exposed to on a daily basis. Most people don't know that. And I should say this. So when you go out and you get ice, like just ice water, iced tea, iced coffee, that ice has aluminum in it, most likely. If you're getting a tea bag in hot water, that tea bag is made from microplastics. You add boiling hot water, those microplastics go into your water, your tea. You don't taste them. And you know what? They're generally regarded as safe. GRAS, GRAS. But no study has been done over 10, 20, 30 years or combined with other chemicals. And that's the issue. The last one I'll say is this. I'm not saying that this is causal. It's not the only thing. Again, I don't believe in one thing causing everything. But we know this study was done out of the University of Texas that when mercury increases in the environment, autism goes up. Not even a little bit, goes up by 63%. So the higher mercury concentration is in the environment in a particular area, unfortunately, those mothers are exposed to it unknowingly, this heavy metal. It passes through their blood, through the placenta and fetal cord to the unborn child. Does it cause autism? No, it's one of the causal factors. There are other reasons, but certainly we know that there's a direct correlation with that. So when I say toxins, they're out there. And I don't mean to scare people because it's the world that we live in, but we at least have to be diligent, though, what helps to remove toxins from the body. And that's what we need to be doing on a daily and then quarterly basis.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy that you brought up the US UK thing because I was just having this conversation literally yesterday with somebody. I saw one of those posts that had like the food labels where it's like the oatmeal in the US versus the oatmeal in the UK. And it was like, just like you said, it's like the US label had like 18 different ingredients in a package of oatmeal. And it's like in the UK, there was like 4. Same thing with ketchup. It was like 4 versus like 12. And speaking of the parabens real quickly, personal story here, personal kind of insight here is back in 2013, I was kind of at the peak of my bodybuilding. I was probably 260, 270. I remember having a photo taken. I was at a Bucks football game. I live locally here in Tampa. So I had a tank top on In the photo, the person I was dating at somebody at the time, and she was in the health space as well. She zoomed in on my arm. She said, Frank, look at your arms. I can see your pores like coming out of your skin. She turned me on to paraben-free lotion and products back then. We went to the same stadium 6 weeks later after using different soap and different lotion on my skin. And there was a significant difference in just the complexion of my skin. And I'm proud to say I've been paraben-free products to the best of my ability for what going on 11 years now. So there's significant truth to, I mean, obviously, there's truth behind it, but there's kind of a personal anecdote like, hey, I was using this stuff back then and I saw it in a picture. And 6 weeks later, my skin looked completely different.
And it's important too, because if we look at it, the number one way that our body naturally detoxes is the liver. Second is the kidneys. And then third would be the skin, although the skin is the largest organ that we can remove toxins through. And then the lungs are just partial. So when we look at the skin, though, when we use these chemical based moisturizers, we're blocking our skin's ability to remove a lot of this waste. So one of those ways, we can talk about a functional medicine detox, but one of those ways is a sauna. I mean, humans were meant to sweat. So exercise is great to get a lot of these chemicals out of our body, but an infrared sauna or a sauna, one, it moves you to that parasympathetic. It works on heat shock proteins. It works on so many different things. Heat shock proteins is just it's just a complex way of saying something simple, which is basically any weak cells helps get rid of them. Any DNA that's misfolded helps to refold it the right way. I mean, that's basically what heat shock proteins are. And it's remarkable. And that's basically, once you get the sauna, it lasts for a long, long time, and you get to get the benefits every time that you use it. So I'm a big advocate of sauna.
Yeah, no, likewise. I'd say the two biggest in-home investments I've made have been a home sauna and then a home cold plunge. It's interesting to hear you say cold plunge is energy out, cold, and then sauna is the energy in. But I guess energy out because you're regulating nervous system, you're having to come back down to parasympathetic. Like it requires more from you to relax in a cold plunge versus a sauna. Is that why it's energy out?
Well, so it's energy out because one of the main benefits of cold plunge is the spike in norepinephrine. And that spike in norepinephrine actually does a lot for the body. But the thing is this, in our Western-based mindset, I'm guilty of this as well. So don't think that I'm above all of this. If 56 degrees is great in the studies for cold plunge benefits, we're like, well, let me see how cold I can get this cold plunge. So we get it down to like 37, right? Because that's like the coldest that it goes. And so, yeah, exactly. I mean, I work with high performers. And so I'm like, yeah, of course you do 37 degrees because that's the coldest it can go. So it's a competition. So when we get into that, it takes your breath away and it's a shock to the system. Anytime something's a shock to the nervous system, it increases stress. So that's energy out. Now, the benefit though of cold plunge is when you're able to get in it, and you've mastered the breath work and you don't go and you actually relax into it, then it teaches your nervous system how to better regulate stress. So then when you encounter a stressful situation, you're better able to handle it. So in the long run, cold plunge can be amazing, but most people are never taught the breath work part to it and they just go in and it's a competition.
Yeah, no, 37 minutes. I'm sorry, 37 degrees, 8 minutes. Like that's what I'm aiming at all the time. But like you said, it's become a competition with me and a couple buddies, like who can stay in the longest. Dr. Cabral, this has been incredible. I mean, I feel like we just tapped the surface of what we could talk about. We definitely have to maybe look at having you back on here. But real quick, talk about your book, The Rain Barrel Effect, how a 6,000-year-old secret holds the answer to finally getting well, losing weight, and feeling alive again. Obviously, we'll point everybody to your site where they can pick it up. But quick pitch on the book. And what did we know 6,000 years that it seemed we've lost over time, and then you gave us the insight here in your book.
Yeah, so 6,000 years ago, there was Ayurvedic medicine. It was around longer than that, but that's the first recorded history, essentially, of it. And what it taught back then was how to bring the body back into balance. So if we touched on that a little bit today. If you are someone that's more of a larger individual, you gain weight more easily. You are just built different, and it's not just about body type. But think about it. Your needs are different than someone who is a hard gainer that loses weight. Like anytime they just miss their calories for the day, they just lose 2-3 pounds. Like it's a different lifestyle. That person needs more sleep. They need to be more in the anabolic state, where the other person actually needs more of the intermittent fasting. They don't need the 8-9 hours of sleep. People are built different. So in the end of the day, it comes back to balancing your individual bioindividuality. So bioindividuality is what we call it. But then my background is a board certified doctor of naturopathy and specializing in functional medicine at home lab testing. So I don't want to throw out all the old wisdom, But what I want to do is talk about something like the stress mood metabolism test. And I want to balance it based on your cortisol levels, your testosterone levels, your thyroid, your vitamin D. People ask me, how much vitamin D should I take a day? And honestly, I don't know. I have no idea. Now, adults, it's about 2,000 to 4,000 IU a day, or about 50 to 100 micrograms, about 36 IUs per pound of body weight. But I can tell you for sure if we measure your vitamin D levels based on how much you're taking now, based on how much sunlight you live, based on the climate, where you live, above Atlanta, Georgia, below Atlanta, Georgia, what time of the year is, all that good stuff. So what the book does is it shares, though, how we become unwell. And we go through the top 10 ways. And then the second half of the book is how we become well again. And that's the de-stress protocol, the diet, the exercise, the stress reduction, the toxin removal, the rest, the emotional balance, the scientifically backed supplements, and the success mindset. And the reason why it's written like that is because we always want to know why. You don't want to begin a protocol and just do something just to do it. Because if you get well, great, but you may not know why. And if you didn't get well, you need to know the why as well, because there's always an answer. So that's my goal. I wrote that book after being in practice for many years. And my goal was to give away all the information, essentially, that we do in our practice. Because I think, like yourself too, once you get to a certain place, it's not about scarcity. It's not about, I need to get more clients. I need anything. It's, I'm good. Like we're in a good spot. There's not enough hours in the day to see all the people in the world. How do we get this to more people?
Absolutely. I love that. And I love what you guys are about. It's funny you talked about the body types there. I always joke that I was like the person that, like, if I looked at a slice of pizza, I'd gain 2 pounds just by smelling it, right? So I definitely always led more towards, I guess that would be the ectomorph.
Whenever you're a bodybuilder, you're more mesomorph and endomorph. Does that you're first of all, you have to be naturally gifted. Even, no matter what you're putting in your body, fuel, all that, no matter how you're gifted to be able to put on muscle mass. Someone like myself, so right now, 5'8", about 165, 170. That's, if I lift and I eat well, that's my natural normal weight. I can go down to 155 if I want. To get to 200 pounds took every ounce of effort and dedication to get there. Tupperware meals, ready to go. So, part of it's also respecting your bio individuality. I wanted to look like guys like you, right? I did. But for me, it made me very unhealthy. And so I learned to say, God, the creator, the universe made you, not anybody else. If you were supposed to be somebody else, you would have been them. And so I started to respect myself a little bit more as well and just say, listen, there's a time and place for everything, and you're good where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Best place to get the book, Amazon, your website, and then where can the audience and guys connect with you, follow you, podcast, socials, all that best stuff, and then we'll tie it up and bring this home with our last and final conversation, Stephen.
Yeah, so my main website is stephencabral.com with a PH, and the book is there. Of course, it's on Amazon as well, and the podcast is called The Cabral Concept. That's pretty much on all media players. It's pretty much just my name, Stephen Cabral, on Instagram and all the socials, and would love to connect with people there as well.
Absolutely. Guys, we'll have all that plugged down there in the show notes. Make sure to check him out. We just touched the surface here today. And like you said, he is dedicated to giving away the best in his industry information, absolutely free, which is what we're about here with the podcast as well. Last question, Stephen, is the title of the show is obviously called The Superhuman Life, right? And it's been a journey here for me for 5 years, trying to unpack and refine and retool what living a superhuman life means to me. As a man of faith, a believer, I do believe that we're put here for a purpose. There's a calling on each and every single one of our lives. And I think most people will accept that. Yeah, there's something I'm here to do, right? There's a purpose on my life, but that's just half of the equation. I think we need to be very intentional about our growth, about developing the skills necessary to bring that purpose to the service of others. And that's what we kind of pride ourselves on doing here. So that's my definition, or kind of my view or perspective on living a superhuman life. But I love to always get the guest takes. So as we wrap up today's conversation, Dr. Stephen Cabral, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Yeah, I think that there's 5 main categories. People have broken it down in other ways before, but it's basically your faith, your spirituality, your friendships, your family, your career purpose, like whatever you want that to be. And then there's your health, and part of that is your body. Your body is the vessel that carries you through this life. But what I always tell people is that it's too much to focus on. So there is no one way to do this, but it's what area right now out of those 5 needs the most attention. And I follow essentially a 12-week year formula. I look at the years, essentially 4 different years, so I can get more out of it. And every 12 weeks, I choose 1 or 2 major things to work on. And I don't leave the rest behind after the 12 weeks. I just add on. So I try to master only 1 or 2 things over that 12 weeks, and then add on then the next 1 or 2 things. And to be honest, like the summertime is more family time. So I know that January, February, March is more travel for work, more speaking around the world, whatever it might be. But then there's a March break. That's with my kids. Like, and then I know summertime's slowing down, more with family. So it's understanding what your main priorities in life, and you can't have a million. I used to think that you could have a million. And just like you said it earlier, and stole that thunder, but it's happiness to me equals growth, and growth is always through service to others. So I'm at my happiest when I'm doing a show like you and with you and just trying to provide good value, or I wake up and I do my podcast, or I work with my team. It's if you can provide service, you're always going to not only benefit others, but it benefits you as well. So to me, for sure, that's part of a superhuman life.
Yeah, amen. In 244 episodes in, I've asked that question. We've done a handful of solo episodes, so probably 240 times. I've never had somebody have as organized of an answer, but I should have known that coming from here today, Stephen. So this has been an absolute honor. Like I said, we touched the surface of things that we could speak about. So we're definitely going to connect with the team and hopefully have you back on here. I know you have your testing outside or on your site. So we'll have all that plugged down in the show notes, guys. Make sure to connect with Stephen and his team. They're changing the world. 1 million people reach, 250,000 clients they've worked with, and probably you guys are going to be the next. So, Stephen, appreciate your time here coming on. Guys, make sure to share this episode with as many people as possible. And if you're enjoying these and getting value, those 5-star ratings and written reviews mean the world to us. But for Stephen Cabral, author of The Rain Barrel Effect, make sure to connect with him. Your host, Frank Rich here. We love you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.